Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this evening we have with us, to my right, we have Aya Sudinna. To my left, we have Bante Sanativahari. And here in the middle, I'm Bante Sudaso. So this evening we're having another Sangha roundtable, as we did last week, I think. So where there's a topic which is discussed by multiple monastics, so each giving their own perspectives and angles on the discussion. And the topic for this evening is the Four Noble Truths. So we can start with paying homage to the Buddha, and after paying homage to the Buddha, then we can start with discussing the Four Noble Truths. And of course, you're welcome at any time to type in questions, and we'll answer them when the time is right. So we can start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassam bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassam bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassam bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as mentioned, we'll each be speaking a bit about the Four Noble Truths. So I think actually we could just start with, maybe we could go through the Four Noble Truths one at a time. So we could each talk a bit about the first Noble Truth and then the second truth and so on. Does that sound good? So who would like to start? Ayasudinna, would you like to say a few words on the first Noble Truth?
Which one?
The first Noble Truth.
You want me to say something?
Yeah.
About it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there are four noble truths. Of those, the first one is called the noble truth of dukkha, or the noble truth of unsatisfactoriness. And what do we understand by that? That the Buddha says, dukkhe loko patittito. That means in this world, dukkha is something that is found all over. Wherever you look, wherever you go, even if we think that we are having pleasure or happiness, very often it ends in unhappiness or dukkha. Now let me explain it to you. Say you have a party and you are very happy and enjoy yourself, eating, drinking, meeting people and all that. But at the end of it, what happens? You depart. You have to stop and then go. And that brings at least a little bit of dukkha, right? So, in the same way, everything that we can think of, you will find that there is always, if there is happiness, there is unhappiness too. So, that is the way it is in this world. So, we live with it and we know it, and still we do not really understand it. That is the problem that people have. Do you want me to continue? Or?
Maybe we can each say a little bit on the subject. So maybe Bante Sanatavahari, would you like to pick that up and talk about some about the First Noble Truth?
Bante, I've always found it very useful to understand dukkha in reference to domanassa. So usually, like as I explained, dukkha is like a broader, very broad term for all the unsatisfactoriness, suffering, pain, and all the bad things in the world. But then when we really like see the Buddha use it like in very particular context, he kind of divides dukkha into dukkha, like physical pain, and then domanassa, which is like mental affliction. Bante, how would you translate domanassa?
Actually translated as depression or downheartedness, mental discomfort.
Mental discomfort.
Yeah.
So I met this Bangladesh monk who did his dissertation on do arahants experience dukkha and domanassa? And obviously at the end he said no domanassa, but if we talk about dukkha as just like a physical sensation, then he said yes. So I think if we have this body, the body still has the nerves, and as long as we have it, there's still that kind of dukkha, although it will not be experienced the same way later on. So really it's the mental suffering or the mind moving when it comes in contact with these kind of physical sensations or things that you dislike. That's the dukkha that, or the domanassa, the suffering that we're really trying to get rid of, which is the mental one. And as long as we have a body until we reach the Mahapariনিbbana, then there's still going to be those physical sensations, which we call pain.
Yeah, and my thoughts are on the First Noble Truth. It's good to remember that in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha's comment on the First Noble Truth was that it is to be fully known. So parinyeya. So the Buddha says, dukkhaṃ parinyeya. So that means dukkha is to be fully known. So in other words, we should constantly be turning attention towards our dukkha. So not ignoring it or repressing it or distracting ourselves from it. So when I was a little kid, there was a popular TV show called Barney, which I actually have never seen in my entire life, for the record. I've never seen even a single episode of Barney ever. But I do recall reading an article which was harshly criticizing the show for giving bad ideas to children. And one of the things they pointed to was an episode where one of the children came to Barney and was like, "Oh, I'm really depressed. I'm really sad. I don't know what to do." And Barney said, "Well, let's just sing happy songs so you forget about your sadness." So, and the author of this article was pointing out how this is communicating a really, really harmful message. And it's the harmful message that you should never investigate your own unpleasant emotions. You should just try to ignore them by covering them up with distractions. So pointing out this is actually a really harmful message. It's teaching children emotional repression and self-unawareness, the exact opposite of emotional survival traits. So similarly, often when we encounter any kind of dukkha, so whether it's physical pain or mental distress of any kind, not getting what we want, or having to do things we don't want, or having to deal with boredom. Common affliction in monasteries is boredom, or the desperate feeling of needing to do something when there's nothing on the schedule. Not my problem, but I've heard many people complain about this kind of problem. Or other people being at a monastery, the dukkha is following the schedule and the rules. They're like, what are all these rules for? I don't need this. This is a whole lot of dukkha. But actually, it's not the schedule or lack of schedule that's the problem. It's our own rejection of the conditions that we're experiencing. So that's what creates the dukkha. Anyway, so again, what the Buddha was saying is that we should not be ignoring our problems or distracting ourselves. Again, often when we're experiencing some kind of mental distress, then we try to distract ourselves. We find something entertaining to do, or even just something to keep us busy, something to keep our mind off of our own dukkha, our own discomfort. But the Buddha says that this is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. When we experience discomfort, we should instead turn our attention towards it and try to understand it completely. So looking at it with the same kind of detached interest that a scientist has. Just asking, what is my dukkha? What is the dukkha in this moment? How does it feel? What's causing it? What's giving rise to this experience of dukkha? But just starting with this basic understanding, how does it feel? What is the experience of dukkha right now? So if you're experiencing pain, pay attention to it. Be present with it. Know it. Take an interest in it. Be curious about it. If you're experiencing sadness, well, be curious about it. Direct your attention towards it. Try to feel it completely. Try to know it in full detail. Because it's only through full understanding of dukkha that we can start to understand what's causing it, which leads us nicely into the second noble truth. So when we closely examine our discomfort, our dukkha, so whether it's bodily or mental, well, the Buddha says that all things have a cause. So nothing happens randomly or spontaneously or chaotically. But everything that appears, it appears because of a cause. When the conditions are right and there's a pre-existing cause, then you get the corresponding result, the corresponding manifestation. So the Buddha says that dukkha is the necessary result of desire, of tanha, of wanting. So for example, when one of the definitions of dukkha that the Buddha gives is not getting what you want, getting what you don't want. Well, that's only possible if you have wants. If you don't have wants, then it's impossible to get what you don't want. If you don't have wants, then it's impossible to not get what you want. So that's only a possibility if your mind is filled with wanting. He also says that things like old age, sickness, and death are dukkha. But that's actually only a problem if we want things to be otherwise. So the Buddha, in one sutta, he says, a being who is subject to decay wishes, may I not decay. But this is impossible, so one suffers. Again, looking, as we understand our dukkha more deeply, then we start to understand that our dukkha is created by our own disconnect from reality, our wanting reality to be something other than it is. So wanting the impermanent to be permanent, wanting the unsatisfying to be satisfying, wanting to always get things our way, wanting to control that which is beyond our control. So through understanding our dukkha, we start to understand the ways that we cause ourselves dukkha. So again, this is going into the second noble truth. So maybe Ayasudina, would you like to talk a bit about the second noble truth?
Yes. So now, the Buddha says that, as just now Bhante was talking about, there are 4 vipallasas called, uh, vipallasa means perversions. That is, we want things to be permanent. Though we know that these things are impermanent, everything is impermanent, but we want them to be permanent. That is why dukkha is caused. We want things to be, different from what they are. So, in the same way, we think of beauty concerning this body. We think of this body as something, you know, in fact, you know that there are beauty contests, right? So, why is that so? Because people want this this body is not at all something pure and beautiful. Neither is it ugly, but it is not pure in the sense now if we open it out, nobody will want to stay there. So, therefore, we want it to be different, right? So, the impure is thought to be pure, the the impermanent is thought to be permanent, then the not so beautiful is thought to be beautiful, uh, and so on and so forth. You see, so because of that, that is why dukkha is caused, because whatever is there that is you know, that is the normal thing. We want it to be something else. And in the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the Buddha talks about how he too, when he was a you know, ordinary person, he still call him the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, he says, um, I too was, uh, attracted to uh, things that were the same as me. That is, now I learned that I am going to decay, to sickness, to death. But I was attracted to the same kind of things. So it was only after he gained wisdom that he realized that that was not the correct thing to do. So, in the same way, we too, we are all wanting the same kind of things that, you know, become decayed, become sick, and ultimately die.
And Bente, would you like to say some words on the second truth?
Bante, um, I just like to focus on a particular quality of tanha, which is the kind of this affect quality to it, or kind of emotional quality to it. If we look at Paticca we see that it is conditioned by Vedana, and Vedana has an affective quality to it, like liking or not liking. And Tanha also has this kind of affect quality to it. Because at least in my experience, I've noticed there's an overemphasis, or people generally think that desire here is a very cognitive thing or intellectual desire. But I think it's important that we realize that there's an affect part to it, to this desire of things, wanting them one way or another. And it's really, at least in my experience, understanding that it's not just like pondering, but it's also like this visceral feeling of wanting things to be a certain way that really causes our suffering.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the word tanha, its literal meaning is thirst. So we translate it as craving, which is a good translation. But its literal meaning is thirst. So that's, as Bhante Sanatavahari was pointing out, there's this almost physical, tangible feeling that usually accompanies tanha, this intense physical drive towards certain activities or certain objects of mind even. And the basic feeling of that is very uncomfortable. So this also is a very important element of practicing with the Four Noble Truths. So just as dukkha is something that's to be fully known, we also need to pay close attention to craving. What does desire feel like? So setting aside what we want for the time being, what does the wanting itself feel like? And if we look closely at it, we'll notice that it's actually really uncomfortable. It's really unpleasant. So whatever we think we want is beside the point. The wanting itself is making us unhappy right now. So we think if I get what I want, then I will be happy at some point in the future. But the truth is we're making ourselves unhappy right in this moment. So you don't need to wait. You don't need to wait for dukkha. We're already doing it to ourselves. You do need to wait for sukha, but you don't need to wait for dukkha. It's already right here. So then you can actually see the causal connection between tanha and dukkha right here in this moment. You don't have to look into the past or the future. You can see it right now. And of course, in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the duty that the Buddha gives for tanha, for the second of these truths, is that it is to be discarded. So pahatabang, it's to be thrown away, cast aside, discarded, abandoned, let go of. So when we turn attention towards the feeling of tanha, this intense discomfort of craving, then actually naturally we want to drop it. We want to discard it. We want to abandon it. When we realize that we're hurting ourselves right now out of some fantasy of a future happiness, that this fantasy of a future happiness is causing us unhappiness right here in the present, then naturally we want to stop doing that to ourselves. We want to stop torturing ourselves. Which leads us to the third noble truth. So Aya Sudinna, would you like to say a few words on the third noble truth?
Okay. Now, third noble truth is that it could be it could be
Louder, a little louder.
okay, that the Buddha says this dukkha and craving could be ceased. You know, we could cease it, and that is good news, isn't it? That it can be given up. It can be given up, and Buddha says, if it was not so, I would never have told you. It is possible because he is a living example of having done so, right? He too had dukkha, he too had craving, he too had all these defilements, but he was able to give them up, to let go of them. And he says that is what we should do. So the nibbana, when talks of nibbana, what it means is it is not something that we get after death. It is something that we can achieve in this world itself, here, while we are living here. So that is why he says, try. There are these, trees and empty huts and so on and so forth. Go and meditate and achieve it. I did, so can you. But one thing is that Buddha says, even I cannot take you by hand and, lead to Nibbana. It has to be done by oneself. Now, that is the most important thing that we have to remember, that we, each one of us, we have to try, and then it is possible to attain Nibbana or liberation, right, from this dukkha.
Bhante?
Bhante. I'll piggyback of what Aya said. So at least in my experience, Bhante, a lot of people ask me what is nirvana, or when they come to the temple, they ask what is nirvana, nibbana, or when people have, all kind of speculative views, and or they imagine, whatever would be the best thing for them, whatever they think, their version of paradise or the best feeling or state in the world is. But Bhante, I like to go back just to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and just keep it really simple. Just there's no more dukkha, there's no more suffering. It's the end of all craving. It's just that. And to me, nirodha is just like the biggest relief, like the maximum relief that could ever be. And I think, we don't have to speculate about like all the other, powers that the arahants have due to their personal qualities. Like, if you just want to know what nibbana is, you just have to know that it's the end of suffering and no craving.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, one of my favorite quotes from the sutta, I know I say this all the time about many different sutta passages, but one of my favorites is 3 words, Nibbanang Paramang Sukhang. So Nibbana is the highest happiness. It's a very simple statement. And the Buddha also says that Nibbana is the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. So you put those two together and you get the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion is the highest happiness. So this is a way of talking about Nibbana that's very accessible. And ultimately, it's the cessation of dukkha, which comes from the cessation of craving. So the ending of craving is the ending of dukkha. So craving covers both desire and aversion. In order to bring craving to an end, one needs to have wisdom, which also clears out delusion. So in this way, we can see that the cessation of craving leads to the complete cessation of dukkha. But it's important to keep in mind, though, that you can also notice moments of cessation of dukkha in your daily life. So sometimes when we talk about the third noble truth, sometimes people think that it's some distant thing which will happen probably in some future lifetime when they attain full enlightenment in another 100 or so lifetimes, then they'll finally understand the third noble truth. Or even if you're very ambitious and you think that you're going to become an arhat in this life, which is worth striving for, maybe you think that you won't really know the third noble truth until you become an arhat. But actually, every moment in which a little bit of your desire comes to an end is a moment when a little bit of your dukkha comes to an end. So again, carrying on this theme of first noticing our dukkha, fully feeling our dukkha, then asking ourselves, what is this dukkha? What's causing it? So then noticing that the underlying desires that's causing the dukkha. Then when we drop that underlying desire, then our dukkha also diminishes a little bit. So a little bit of our dukkha falls away, and we start to feel a bit more happiness and peacefulness and serenity of mind. So pay attention to those moments when we let go of a little bit of our dukkha, those moments when our dukkha diminishes even slightly. Because by fully paying attention to those moments, then we build our faith in the Buddhist path. We build our confidence that Buddhist practice really works. So it's important to, again, not to think of the cessation of dukkha only as being something that happens at full enlightenment, but to recognize that every single moment when we apply the Buddha's teachings and we drop a little bit of our defilements is a moment when we can recognize the third noble truth. The Buddha says about the third noble truth, again carrying on with the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, he says that the third noble truth is sachikata bang. That means it's to be realized. And this word sachikata bang, it literally means to see it with your own eyes. So to directly observe it in your own experience. So again, this is something which we can see for ourselves in every moment. And sometimes it's not even something which happens deliberately. Like we're sitting here craving something, fantasizing about ice cream or napping or tea or whatever it is you fantasize about. And we're just sitting there like, yes, I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it. And at some point we just get tired of putting all that energy into wanting something. And we stop and notice the mind becomes more peaceful. When we drop that obsessive fantasy, the mind becomes more peaceful. And we're like, oh, this is kind of nice, actually. It's kind of nice to not be craving whatever it is we're craving. And then usually we start craving something else pretty quickly, and the dukkha starts flooding back in. So often it's just like these little moments, these little rays of light which briefly shine through the clouds of dukkha in our mind. Kind of like the rays of light shining through the blinds behind me. It's just like little bits poking through the slats. Well, sometimes that's what our experience is like. Our mind is completely clouded over with dukkha, and then we let go a little bit of our desires. And this little ray of light shines through, this little ray of peace and happiness. And it's like, oh, this is possible. This is possible. And what makes it possible is the fact that we've been practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, which of course is the fourth noble truth. So maybe we could start talking a bit about the fourth noble truth, the path that leads to the ending of dukkha. So Ayasudina, would you like to say a few words?
Okay. The Noble Eightfold Path. That is the fourth noble truth. That is what gives us hope of attaining liberation. And what is the Noble Eightfold Path? It is divided into three sections. That is the morality or the virtue group, which contains the uh, first three, not the first three, but three of them. That is the speech part, right? Uh, Samma vacha, Samma kammanta, Samma ajiva. That is right action, right, first right speech, right action, and right livelihood. That is the first thing that we have to practice. But it is when you think of the Noble Eightfold Path, the eight factors, the these don't form go into the first section. The first section is called right view and right understanding or right thinking. So the first those two are very important because it is everything, all the rest is based on those two. So therefore, unless we have right view, now Buddha talks of right view and wrong view in many suttas. So unless we have right view, we cannot do anything. Can we? Even in mundane life, in ordinary life, if we don't have right view, we will always do the wrong thing. So therefore, right view is very important, and then from there we get on to the other rest of them. So now I have talked about the first, that is the first thing that we have to practice, that is Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. And the next is Samma Virya, that is without virya, without energy, without putting forth effort, we cannot achieve anything, not in mundane life even. So, Samma Virya, then Samma Samadhi, Samma Samma Samma
Sati.
Sati, Samma Samadhi. So, mindfulness is the next one. We have to achieve these three things after the first that I talked about. Then we have to achieve these three things, and then we get the wisdom part, that is the right view and the right thought. So, but remember, for everything, those two are very important. Right thinking and right view. Right view is very important.
Bhante?
Bante. Um, Actually, a couple weeks ago, Bante gave a talk about um, the second step in the Noble Eightfold Path. And I think Bante called it motivation. Right, Bante? Something like that?
Maybe, I don't remember. Yeah. Or intention or attitude, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe attitude. Motivation is pretty good, though. I like that.
Anyways, it clicked with me. And then I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so the first one, when we talk about usually samaditi, we're talking about the Four Noble Truths most of the time. That's the way it's laid out. And then I was like, well, like that's our goal. We have to have some general understanding of where we want to go. Like, what are we trying to achieve? The 12 parts to the, as are explained in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, bringing it back to that sutta. Then I was like, well, then you need some motivation to get to that goal, right? And then that motivation like embodies your actions, right? And then not only physical actions, but then also mental actions, like the mental training. And then all of that brings you back to getting back to your goal. And I say this because, I have a rant about like how, traditionally in the West stuff is taught and how people come into Buddhism and meditation. I'll try to avoid it right now. But it has to do with morality that is not emphasized enough. And people like try to start from meditation and work their way around without knowing the goal or having the proper behavior. But, morality only seems like it's like something that's trying to control you if it has nothing to do with your goal. So if you have the right goal in mind, if you have the right motivation, then actually you don't have to worry about the precepts or trying to do the precepts. They happen naturally. That's just the way you act. That's just the way a person with nekama and abhyapada and avihimsa goes. They're not trying to harm or hurt anyone. They don't have to think, well, I can't do this because the Buddha said not to, and stuff like that. So once you have the goal in mind, you have, this is my goal, and you have the right motivation, then you don't, morality is easy. So this is kind of like myself to, like Western people who are not really about morality. Like, just focus on really on the goal, and then cultivate that motivation, and then the morality will happen normally. And Bante, that's what I'll say about the Noble Eightfold Path.
I want to hear you rant someday. That sounds great. But yeah, just picking up on that, I would also keep in mind, recommend that you keep in mind that a enlightened being naturally acts with perfect morality. So when we take on the practices of morality, of kindness and generosity and consideration and thoughtfulness and self-restraint and so on, what we're doing is that we're acting the way an enlightened being would act. In fact, there's a really lovely sutta called the Uposatha Sutta, where the Buddha says that the 8 precepts are a description of the behavior of an arhat. So an arhat naturally follows the 8 precepts. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to recite the 8 precepts or take them formally. That's just naturally how they live. So when we take on the 8 precepts, we're making ourselves act like an enlightened being. And even the 5 precepts already brings us much closer to acting like an enlightened being. Actually, I'm quite grateful that you did put some emphasis on the morality side of practice, because it's actually inescapable. When I think about the Noble Eightfold Path, I would also include the second one, Samma Sankappa. Also has a very strong moral component to it. So if you do it that way, then you actually wind up with half of the Eightfold Path is morality. And also, what is right effort? So the Buddha defines right effort as the effort to prevent unwholesome mind states from arising, to remove unwholesome mind states that are already present, to try to produce wholesome mind states, and to maintain and perfect wholesome mind states that are present. So this also is very much in line with morality. So morality is about not hurting anyone and trying to help everyone. So that means we need to constantly try to remove the unwholesome tendencies of mind, because unwholesome tendencies are the tendencies to hurt people, and to constantly make an effort to produce wholesome mind states, which are the tendencies to help people. So then we're up to 5 out of 8 of the Noble Eightfold Path is morality. And why are we practicing morality in the first place? It's because we understand causality, which is another way that the right view is spoken about. Right view is about understanding cause and effect. It's about understanding how our choices have consequences, have results. So then we see that morality is also part of right view. So now we're up to 6 out of 8 of the Eightfold Path is about morality. And then mindfulness. In order to recognize our unwholesome habits, our unwholesome tendencies, we need to have mindfulness. We need to have self-awareness. So a clear knowing of what we're doing with our body, what we're saying with our mouth, and what we're thinking with our mind. So keeping in mind that in Buddhism, morality is not just what you say or what you do, it's also what you think. So mindfulness of our own mind is a critically important component of morality. So then we're up to 7 out of 8 of the Eightfold Path is morality. So I think only samadhi is a bit hard to justify as being a principle of morality. But even that, samadhi is a completely blameless activity. Even if you're not doing anything with your life except vegging out in samadhi all day long, you're not hurting anyone. You're living a completely harmless and blameless life. You might not be achieving much of anything if all you're doing is practicing samadhi, but it's a completely blameless life. So you're at least practicing the non-harming aspect of morality. So from this perspective, we can see that all 8 of the 8 steps of the Noble Eightfold Path are related to morality. So it's not something that can be pulled apart. You can also see how all 8 of them are ultimately, they arise from wisdom. And actually in the, what is it? What's the sutta where the refrain is right view comes first? Sammaditthi Sutta, of course. The Sammaditthi Sutta, it says over and over again, right view comes first, right view comes first, right view comes first. Right view is the precedent of all wholesome states. So we're constantly coming back to right view, our basic understanding of how the universe operates. And that's our motivation to practice the rest of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it leads us to understanding why morality is indispensable, to why samadhi is very important. There's a lot of people these days who say that samadhi is not so important, that you just need to practice wisdom. But actually, this is exactly the opposite of what the Buddha said. The Buddha was quite clear that without samadhi, there can be no wisdom. Wisdom can only be very superficial if we don't have strong samadhi. Yes, I think it's good to keep in mind the Mahachattarisika. Okay, Protodhamma says it's the Mahachattarisika Sutta, the Great 40, which says right view comes first. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so those are a few ruminations. Would you, Ayasudina, would you like to say some more on the Noble Eightfold Path or on any one of the 8?
Okay. We have been talking much about morality. It's like the foundation of a house or whatever building that we are building. Unless there is morality, that is why Buddha says morality is important, because when we sit down to meditate, unless we have morality, our mind gets restless. The 5 hindrances, the 5 hindrances, uh, they come because we are not moral, right? Because when we don't have that morality, we start to try to meditate. Meditating means keeping our mind calm. The mind doesn't become calm. It becomes restless. It becomes doubtful. It becomes all the 5 hindrances, right? They come. So therefore, that is why morality is important. And once you now, don't think that we have to be, now supposing we have done certain wrong things before, it doesn't mean that we cannot become pure again. Now you know about so many instances of examples in the text, in the the Buddha's dispensation. You find a lot of people like Angulimala and many robbers and all kinds of people who have become better. And what Buddha says is, it's okay if you have done wrong. Now don't think about it. That is why we are asked to keep to the present, to think of the present moment all the time. Because when we think of the present moment and make that moment pure and clean, then even if our past is a little cloudy, we don't have to think about those things, and go from here, right? Now, see, Angulimala has produced a sutta that I have been using to so many pregnant women in our, at our temple. They come when they are pregnant, and I chant the sutta. Now, that was made by Angulimala, you see, and Angulimala, how many people he killed, more than 1,000. So, Buddha gave this opportunity to him to cleanse himself, so that now, even 2,600 years later, we are still using that paritta to help pregnant women. And I really believe that it is possible. So, therefore, the samadhi part comes only if we have that morality. We sit down to meditate. Then, even if we have done wrong, we can, put that into the past, cover it up with leaves, as Buddha has said, and go from there and then attain samadhi. So, unless we have samadhi, we cannot have wisdom. So, therefore, these are things that are all connected. So, that is why Buddha has laid down these, I shouldn't use the word rules, but these disciplinary ways of living.
Bhante, would you like to speak a bit more on the Eightfold Path or any part of it?
Yes, Bhante. Kind of just going with the morality theme. There's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya. I think in English they call it like with what purpose. It's between Venerable Ananda and the Buddha. And here the Buddha outlines all the steps to awakening. And it's a series of questions and answers. And the Buddha asked, Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha, what is the purpose? It starts off with like, what is the purpose of morality? And he says to be free from worries. And then from there it goes to like, one has like all these wholesome mental states and it goes through the whole path. But right in the beginning, just to get like the meditative path going, you have to have like good morality right in the beginning. That's how the sutta starts. Like that's the important thing. So I think when I read that sutta, I was like, wow, this is really important. It's not something that we can just throw away. And it's actually the basis to having wholesome mind states. You can imagine how difficult it'd be to have wholesome mind states if you're like cheating, lying, and doing all this other bad stuff. I mean, it'd be very difficult. And then I found something very interesting, Bante, like a couple months ago. There's this neuroscientist that I listened to named Dr. Uberman from Stanford University. And he was talking about happiness. And he said, like, they did scans and they found out that even when people are experiencing happiness, there's pain. They found the same parts of the brain that light up for pain. They also light up when there's happiness. So I was like, oh, there is like dukkha even in happiness, right? The Buddha was right. He knew this. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I shared it like all the people that I knew at that moment. But it was awesome. And I was like, wow, that's, what, they're getting there. It's getting there now.
That's so Buddhist. So ordinarily, if somebody found out that we're in pain when we're happy, that would be bad news. Only a Buddhist would gleefully share this with the world.
Yeah, I send it to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the lovely things about Buddhism. We get to talk about all the things that people don't normally like to talk about. So we get to talk about pain, loss, death, decay, decrepitude, but we get to talk about it with a smile. Because we also know that if we're practicing the Buddha's teachings correctly, then these things won't bother us. So that's the really lovely thing about Buddhism, is that we don't need to turn away from anything, because we know that if we practice well, then we will be unaffected, that we don't need to be disturbed. But yeah, carrying on with the Noble Eightfold Path, again, just emphasizing that samadhi is in fact an important component of the path, as I mentioned briefly earlier. So we've been talking a lot about morality so far, but remembering that samma samadhi is one of the 8 steps of the path. And in a couple of suttas, the Buddha just gives a very straightforward definition of samma samadhi. He says that it's practicing the 4 jhanas. So again, these days you'll find some teachers who say that jhana is not important, or even that it's dangerous. They'll say that samadhi is not that valuable. But the Buddha was very clear that it's not only valuable, it's necessary. It's necessary to practice samadhi. It's necessary to at least make an effort to get somewhere close to jhanas, to these very deep, powerful states of concentration. And then to really ask ourselves what conditions in our life will support good samadhi. So of course, part of it is morality, as the 3 of us have spoken about it at some length. So through practicing morality, then we have no regret, we have no remorse. Our mind is happy and joyful. And the Buddha says, Sukhino chittang samadhiyati. When the mind is happy, one attains samadhi. One gets concentration. So that's an important part, is practicing morality. Also renunciation. So renunciation comes from the second part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's the Samasankappa. One of the three parts of it is Nekama Sankappa. So the attitude of renunciation, the willingness to let go of things, the attitude of contentment, of not needing anything in particular, not needing anything in order to be happy. Excuse me. So in order to practice samadhi, we need to put down our desires for other things, at least for a little while. If you're sitting there and you're just thinking about how desperately you want to watch reruns of Seinfeld or whatever it is you want to watch reruns of, I don't even know. My knowledge of pop culture died out 15 years ago when I became a monk. So desperately wanting to watch reruns of whatever show you want to watch reruns of, or thinking about how much you're looking forward to lunch tomorrow, or whatever it is you're wasting time with your desires and obsessions, then you'll be far from samadhi. So in order to enter samadhi, you at least need to be willing to renounce your own thoughts for a little while, to put down your own thoughts long enough for the mind to settle and gather together into stillness. So renunciation is a necessary component for samadhi practice. So earlier today, I was talking about a little bit about renunciation as being the heart of monastic life. So living a simple life, a life with few possessions and few distractions and few interests and few involvements. That not only makes for a simple and uncluttered life, it also makes for a simple and uncluttered mind. When the mind is uncluttered, then it's much easier for us to drop everything and enter into samadhi, to enter into stillness. So the more activities and engagements we have and the more possessions we have, then the more difficult it is to enter samadhi. And of course, samadhi also comes from right view, like everything else in the Eightfold Path. It's the right view of understanding that samadhi is a necessary component for deep wisdom. It's the right view also of knowing how to enter samadhi in the first place. The right view of understanding how all the 8 steps of the Eightfold Path all fit together and interlock. Venerables, would you like to say anything more on the topic of the Eightfold Path?
I don't think I will.
Enough for now? Okay.
Why not ask them also what they would?
Well, we have a few questions online, but we could also take questions from the monastery residents. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and start going through some of the questions online. So Angela asks, Venerables, do you have advice for letting go of desires for ideals and hopes, such as fairness?
Such as what?
Fairness.
Fairness.
Like wanting things to be fair.
Yeah, that's one of the things that people always come up with. Because, because they think that, getting involved in all these things is so important to them. You see, they can't give up the politics. So that is the problem. But actually, when you go to see, do you think that we could change in that way? It's not possible. Change must come from within. So, if my idea is that if we each one tries to keep to the precepts or whatever whatever we think is good, we could influence so many others, because they, by seeing that we are happy and we are trusted by people, and people can trust us because we would never harm anybody, only help somebody. So in that way we could become sort of help to others too, because they too could by example they could come to the same kind of thinking or view that, and they could influence others. But as far as the fairness of views, do you think that there is fairness in any part of the world? No, you don't find it. It is something that I think we ourselves have to, practice, not expect others to do. What do you think, Bande?
Well, actually, what came to mind for me was a quote from Venerable Losang Drime, who's a bhikkhuni in the Tibetan tradition. She said, "You can't expect samsara to be fair."
Yeah.
It's a very simple statement. So yeah, I would just first you need to come to grips with the fact that the world is not fair. And it's full of unenlightened people who are overflowing with defilements. So what do you expect? What do you expect from people like that? Horrible things, mostly. And what do you see when you look at the news? Horrible things. This should not come as a surprise. In fact, it would be a surprise if you looked at the news and it was all like wonderful stories about how everyone was getting along in peace and harmony. That would be surprising. A nice surprise, but I'm not expecting it to happen anytime in the next 1,000 years. Or ever, realistically. It's one of those things that happens rarely in samsara. So overall, the characteristic of samsara is strife and disappointment. Again, we're all about the good news in Buddhism.
That's also dukkha, isn't it?
Yeah. So expecting samsara to be fair is dukkha, because samsara is not fair. What samsara is causal. That's what it is. It's not fair, but it is causal. So we can put into play the causes that produce the effects that we want. As Ayasudana was saying, if you want the world to be fair, then practice fairness yourself. And you'll make at least one little fragment of the world more fair. But don't expect it from other people, because other people are lost in their own defilements and delusions. So some of them will be interested in fairness and some will not. But that's not your place to decide for them. Any thoughts on this question?
No, Bate.
Okay. Next, Don asks, how to turn physical pain into non-suffering in a world where pain is looked upon as unnatural, bad, and frowned upon, especially with one with chronic pain. Bhante?
I've gotten this question a lot. I don't know why it keeps coming to me. So we have to realize, as you said, I think, or you're alluding to at least what I got from it, is pain is inevitable, and this world is full of pain. So to have the hopes that you're not gonna feel pain, it's unrealistic worldview. You're gonna experience it. So then, how can we deal with it? How can we manage it? And I don't know what to say for those people who suffer from chronic pain. I can't imagine it, how difficult it must be and unbearable. But you're still alive, and you have a choice to, what kind of quality of life do you want to have? How do you want to live your life? So, me as like a ex-military person, I always kind of like try to be heroic. And I'm like, you know what? Like, despite whatever the world throws at me, all the bad things, I'm going to be the one who's going to choose how to live my life. So regardless of what happens out there when this body, I'm the one who gets to choose the quality of my life. And, sometimes it's enough to get me through, to the next day or to the next minute. So I think one of the things that I remember one chant the Buddhists call like Mahaviro, right? Like the great hero, right, Bante?
Yeah.
So we can also look to the Buddha as the great hero who overcame all suffering. So we can try to embody those heroic aspects of the Buddha, of still working on the path despite all the bad things that are happening to us. So, I mean, that's all I can come up with right now, Bante.
Great. Yeah, the one thing I would just add to that is to pay attention to your pain. So as the Buddha said, dukkhaṃ pariññeyaṃ. So dukkha must be fully understood. So don't ignore or suppress your pain, but pay attention to it. Again, with a mind of curiosity, of interest, of acceptance. This is how you'll come to really understand what pain is, and also how you'll start to see that pain is not suffering. Pain is just sensation. Suffering is something extra that we add when we want that sensation to go away. So if you can be fully accepting and aware of the sensation, then it won't hurt anymore. So this is not easy, and actually it relies upon very strong sati and very strong samadhi. So you need to have a very good mindfulness and concentration. And you also need to already have pretty good equanimity and patience. But if you have those qualities, then you can pay attention to pain, see it for what it actually is, recognize that the suffering is something extra you are adding, and you can drop it. So I don't have chronic pain, but I have, there was a time during a 3-month retreat many years ago where the monk who was leading the retreat encouraged all of us to do periods of 4-hour periods of continuous sitting meditation every day. So just sitting still for 4 hours straight. And it's astounding how painful that is. So the first hour or so is okay. And then when you get to about the 2-hour mark, it feels like your entire body is being stabbed with little knives. And it's just unbelievably agonizingly painful just to sit still for that long. But at some point, if you stay with it and you pay attention, then you'll start to realize that the suffering is optional. The sensations are still there, but they don't need to be painful. So you can do the same with any other kind of pain. I've also had times when my body was injured, and just doing the same practice of mindfulness and equanimity, and the pain diminishes or even disappears entirely. So it can be done. It can be done. I guess I don't know. Any thoughts on pain?
I was thinking of Nakula Mata and Nakula Pita. The Nakula Pita, when he was almost dying, he had a lot of pain, but he recovered. So anyway, after recovering, he went to the Buddha and then told him about this. And then the Buddha said, Nakula Pita, uh, when you have pain, that is one arrow or one dart. That is the word he used, dart. One dart. The pain is one dart. Don't add another dart. What he meant was, he couldn't understand, Nakula Pita couldn't understand. He went to Venerable Sariputta and asked him to explain. And Venerable Sariputta said, the second dart is the mental pain, based on the experience of pain. So, exactly what Bante was talking about. Uh, and also, there was another case that came to my mind. That was when Anatha Pindika was dying. Anatha Pindika, all of you know Anatha Pindika, I think. He was one of the most, what do you call, one of the chief lay disciples of the Buddha. And when he was dying, uh, he Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Ananda went to see him. And then when he said, my body is so racked with pain, it is as if someone is having some kind of rope or something and dragging on two sides, and my whole body is in pain. Then Venerable Sariputta said, um, you know, he gave a very good meditation. The meditation was, think like this. Um, this, um, the, I can't exactly remember the, the order in which he gave. But he talked about the elements, then he talked about the feelings, the the parts of the body, like this body is not mine, this feeling is not mine, like that. I can't remember exactly all the details. And that this body is made up of elements, the four elements, and so on, to think like that. So when Venerable Sariputta said all this, Anathapindika started crying. Then when he started crying, Venerable Sariputta asked, "Are you afraid of death?" "No, Bante, it is not that. Why have you not given this meditation before?" Then, Venerable Sariputta said, "Usually this is given to monastics, not to the lay people. But you know that lay people, there are lay people who can understand this and who can follow it." I hope you all will later look. It's in Majjhima Nikaya, Anathapindika Sutta. It's a very beautiful sutta, and it gives a lot of meditation. And it deals with pain. It deals with pain.
Great, thank you, Aya. Then Denise asks a question. I think this is directed at me. She says, "Bante, how does one veg out all day on samadhi?" So that refers to somebody who they're just practicing samadhi meditation all day, and they don't make any effort to develop wisdom. So just spending all their time just hanging out in the pleasant state of mind, which is samadhi. So in the suttas, the Buddha says that if one practices samadhi but does not cultivate wisdom, then one will be reborn as a Brahma Deva. But one will not attain awakening. One will just be reborn in the Brahma worlds and live a very long and very pleasant life in the Brahma worlds. But one will still be caught in the cycle of samsara. So practicing samadhi is very important because it helps to sharpen and clarify the mind. It gives power and strength to the mind. But one is then to direct that sharpness, clarity, and power towards a direct experience of anicca, dukkha, anatta. And so there's several suttas where the Buddha says that one can enter into samadhi, in particular jhana states, and then direct the mind towards impermanence. And just that can be enough to attain full enlightenment. So to enter samadhi and then point the mind towards impermanence, and that can be enough to attain enlightenment. But if you don't ever direct your mind towards impermanence or towards not self, if you just hang out in the pleasure of samadhi, then you will not attain enlightenment. You'll just have a pretty pleasant life and then a pretty pleasant next life, and then the cycle continues and you'll wind up falling back into not so pleasant lives sooner or later. Then Anita asks, "Can we please do this sutta one of these days?" We referred to several suttas, so I'm not sure which one you were talking about, but if you tell us which sutta you want us to talk about, I'll put it on the list. Kumo asks what the name of the scientist who did the research on brain scans is. Do you remember the name?
Dr. Uberman from Stanford University.
Okay. Then Pial and Indira ask, in the second noble truth, abandoning craving, the Pali terms are described as chago, patinissago, mutti, analayo. Are they different in meaning, that is, different methods of abandoning, or do they mean the same? So just briefly speaking about those four words, so chaga means giving up. It also means generosity, by the way. But in that context, it means giving up. Patinissaga means relinquishing. Mutti means releasing or letting go. And analaya means not adhering to, not sticking to. So non-attachment. So they're all saying basically the same thing as far as I can tell. It's just different. One of the ways that word definitions are given in the suttas, and especially in the commentaries, is rather than actually define the term, they'll just give a list of synonyms or near synonyms. And that list of near synonyms is meant to communicate the intended meaning of the main word. I haven't heard these four spoken about as being different methods. I don't know if you heard anything like that.
About these words?
Yeah.
Don't they come in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta?
Yes, but they're asking if these four words have a different meaning or refer to different methods.
Sometimes they have slightly different meanings, isn't that so? But only thing is, when we translate them, it's difficult to get translations for them in English.
Yeah. Yes, I think they're basically the same thing, just synonyms of the same basic idea. Then Proto-Dhamma says, in the suttas, I believe Venerable Sariputta became an arhat while listening to a discourse. Do you think it is still possible to attain arhatship by listening or reading a sutta?
I think if you've had a lot of training in this life and also in previous lives, it could be the catalyst. But I mean, the training had to happen at some point.
Yeah, it was the same with Sariputta. Venerable Sariputta had been practicing for hundreds of lifetimes. And in fact, he had met one of the previous Buddhas. And had made a vow when he met that previous Buddha. He'd made a vow that he would become one of the chief disciples of a future Buddha. So very interesting and very specific vow. But the point was that Sariputta had been practicing for hundreds of lifetimes to the point where he was already extremely close to enlightenment. So he didn't need very much more. It's kind of like the old saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, of course, a straw is not going to break a camel's back. It's all the other weight that was already on the camel plus the straw. That's what breaks the camel's back, not the straw. It's the straw plus everything else that was already there. So that's the case with Venerable Sariputta. He already had 99.999% of the path done. He just needed a little bit more. And that was, he got that little bit more, which made him a stream enterer. And then he practiced very diligently for 2 weeks, I think, 2 weeks. And then it was while listening to a Dhamma talk that he became an arhat. He got that final step. But the point...
Actually, he was listening to a Dhamma talk given to his nephew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point being is that he had already done most of the practice previously. And it's the same. Some other suttas where someone seems to attain enlightenment very quickly, it's because they had already been practicing for a very long time. There's not that many people like that around anymore.
Who knows? We also might have.
Well, we've all been practicing for a really long time.
But still, maybe sometimes not having the right view.
Yeah. And that's the end of the questions from online. We still have a few minutes if there's any other questions. Anyone here? Justin, go ahead.
So how do we practice non-attachment and non-craving in activities that take long periods of time? So for instance, like let's say that the monastery, really wants like a giant statue erected in the courtyard. And I say this because, I'm constantly working like on projects in my house or my backyard, and I find sometimes maybe I'll come into like attachment or craving and wanting to get them done or wanting to like have them done in a certain way.
Well, first off, if you want to erect a giant Buddha statue in the monastery yard, I'm completely on board with this idea. So there's actually a vihara about an hour from here, which has the largest outdoor Buddha statue in North America. It's pretty special. and especially by North American standards. If you go to Asia, it's small and commonplace by comparison, but by our standards, it's huge. I think it's like 35 feet tall or something. Which again, if you go to Asia, you'll see that everywhere, but here it's rare. Anyway, so just take things one step at a time. Don't constantly think about the end result or the end goal or how much left there is to do or how much you've done. Just do what's right in front of you. There's a lovely story from my preceptor when he was a junior monk. My preceptor is Ajahn Pasano. He lived with Ajahn Chah for many years. So at one point he was a junior monk and he was assigned to sweep the courtyard. And it was a very big courtyard and it was covered with leaves. And he starts complaining to the monk. He's like, I have to sweep. Do I really have to sweep all of these leaves? And the monk says, no, you just have to sweep what's right in front of your broom. Okay. Anything else? Okay, well, maybe that's enough for one evening. So thank you, Ayasudinna and Bhante Sanata Vihari. And thank you to all of you, both in person and online, who have participated. So we will have Sutta study again tomorrow morning with Ayasudinna.
Okay.
I don't remember what sutta, but we'll find
Shall
out.
I do a sort of easier sutta?
I'll have to look and see what.
I was wondering if I should do, because today I was thinking might have been a little.
Don't worry about it. We're used to having advanced topics.
But I can do any of those that I suggested. But
yeah. Don't worry. We're used to advanced topics, and our viewers are used to difficult topics. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Then you choose the topic. I will do it.
Okay. So tomorrow Sutta study with Ayasudinna, and then in the evening we'll have another group Dhamma discussion like this with a group of monks all sharing their perspectives on one topic. So please join in for our ongoing programs, and also if you're in the area, feel free to come in and participate in person for the monastery events. So we'll end the evening with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.